The cracks in our foundation were subtle at first. Missed dinners turned into missed weekends. The moments we used to steal for ourselves, quiet walks on the beach, late-night talks about the future, vanished. Emma's smiles, once so warm, now felt hollow. I was there, but not really. My mind was consumed by targets, projections, and meetings. Maya, ever perceptive despite her young age, would climb into my lap and ask, "Daddy, why don't you smile as much anymore?" Her innocent question gutted me. How do you explain to a child that the dreams you're chasing are the very things pulling you away? By the time I turned 25, Horizon Codes had grown into a thriving enterprise with a small office in the heart of Harbor Edge. But the distance between Emma and me was no longer something we could ignore. We had become co-pilots rather than partners, navigating life alongside each other but rarely together. We made the hardest decision of our lives to part ways. Our divorce was amicable, a word that sounds so clinical for something so raw. We weren't enemies, we were just two people who had loved each other deeply but couldn't find a way back to the US we used to be. Emma and I worked hard to keep things stable for Maya. We celebrated her milestones together, sat side by side at school plays, and always put her needs first. "We may not be husband and wife anymore," Emma once said to me, "but we'll always be her parents." Despite the heartbreak, there was a strange sense of relief. The love Emma and I shared hadn't vanished, it had simply transformed into something quieter, something built on mutual respect and a shared history. Maya was the thread that bound us, her laughter filling the gaps we couldn't mend. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in fiery hues, Emma joined me on the porch of my modest home. The air smelled of salt and promise as we sat in companionable silence, sipping coffee. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, the woman who had been my partner through life's stormiest seas, and saw both the girl I had fallen for, and the friend she had become. "I think we did what we could," I replied. "And Maya's happy. That's what matters." Emma smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm glad we're friends, Liam. I don't know what I'd do without you." As the waves lapped at the shore, I realized something profound. Life doesn't offer closure, it offers chapters. Harbor Edge, with its windswept cliffs and endless horizons, wasn't just the backdrop of my story. It was a character in it, shaping me, challenging me, and reminding me that even the stormiest tides eventually recede. The first year of marriage with Emma felt like a whirlwind, a blend of hope, chaos, and endless nights of juggling responsibilities. We were young, naive, and wildly in love, but life seemed determined to test us. While other couples our age were figuring out college parties and internships, we were knee-deep in diapers and daycare. I poured my soul into Horizon Codes, the small tech startup I had dreamed of building since high school. Late nights turned into early mornings, coding furiously while Emma cradled Maya in her arms. "Don't forget to eat, Liam," she'd call out softly, leaving a plate of food on my desk. Her quiet support was the backbone of those early years, but I often wondered if she needed more from me than I could give. At just 18, I was a husband, a father, and the CEO of a fledgling company, all rolled into one. The pressure was immense, but I convinced myself that hard work and perseverance would make everything fall into place. I'd tell myself, it's all for them, for Emma, for Maya. Emma, on the other hand, bore the brunt of the emotional labor. She was the one soothing Maya's cries in the dead of night, the one remembering doctor's appointments, and the one holding us together when I felt like I was falling apart. "We're a team, Liam," she'd remind me whenever I apologized for missing another family dinner. But deep down, I could see the toll it was taking on her. As Horizon Codes began to grow, so did the distance between us. By the time I turned 22, the startup had secured its first big investor. What started as a one-man operation in our spare bedroom had expanded into a small team working out of an office in Harbor Edge. I should have been thrilled, this was the dream, wasn't it? But every success came with a cost. I started coming home later and later, often missing bedtime stories with Maya. Emma tried to be understanding, but the unspoken tension between us grew heavier with each passing day. She'd sit on the couch, waiting for me to come home, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion when I finally walked through the door. "You don't have to do it all alone," she said one night as we sat together after Maya had gone to bed. Her words were gentle, but they cut through me like a knife. I wanted to tell her she was right, that I was drowning under the weight of expectations I had placed on myself. But instead, I just nodded, promising her and myself that things would get better. They didn't. The fight started small, like ripples on the surface of a still lake. Forgotten anniversaries, missed family outings, and the ever-present hum of my phone during dinner. Emma would ask, "When was the last time you really looked at me, Liam?" I didn't have an answer. I wanted to look at her, to see her the way I used to, but my mind was always elsewhere, on emails, deadlines, and pitches. By the time Maya turned 5, the ripples had grown into waves, threatening to capsize the fragile boat we were trying to steer. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about my work hours, Emma stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Maya, clutching her favorite stuffed bear, looked up at me with wide, questioning eyes. "Daddy, are you and Mommy okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I knelt down beside her, forcing a smile. "We're just talking, sweetheart. Everything's okay," but it wasn't, not by a long shot. Emma and I tried therapy, hoping to mend the cracks that had formed in our marriage. For a while it seemed to help. We learned to communicate better, to listen instead of just waiting for our turn to speak. But the deeper issues, the ones neither of us wanted to confront, remained untouched. The truth was, we were two different people than we had been when we first fell in love. Emma had grown into a strong, self-assured woman who knew what she wanted from life. I admired her for it, but I also felt like I was holding her back. "You deserve someone who can be present, Emma," I told her one night as we sat on the porch, the ocean breeze carrying our words into the night. She didn't argue. Instead, she reached out and took my hand, her grip firm yet gentle. "And you deserve to chase your dreams without feeling guilty about it." We both knew what that conversation meant. A week later we sat down with Maya and told her the news. "Mommy and Daddy love you very much," Emma explained, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "But we're going to live in different houses from now on." Maya didn't fully understand, of course. How could she? She was only 5. But she nodded solemnly, her little hands clutching mine and Emma's. "Will we still have pancakes on Saturday?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. I smiled through the lump in my throat. "Always, sweetheart. That's a promise." The divorce was amicable, as far as divorces go. There were no screaming matches, no battles over custody. Emma and I were committed to putting Maya first, even if it meant putting our own feelings aside. We divided our time with her evenly, ensuring she felt loved and supported no matter where she was. "We may not be married anymore," Emma said during one of our many co-parenting discussions, "but we'll always be a family." In the months that followed, I threw myself into my work, using it as both a distraction and a coping mechanism. Horizon Codes continued to thrive, attracting more clients and expanding its reach beyond Harbor Edge. On the surface, it seemed like I had everything: a successful career, a beautiful daughter, and a peaceful co-parenting arrangement with my ex-wife. But beneath the surface, I felt hollow. One evening, Emma invited me over for dinner at her place. She had started dating again, a fact she had shared with me hesitantly, as if afraid of how I might react. "His name is Ryan," she said, her voice tentative. "He's a teacher. Maya likes him." I forced a smile, nodding as if the news didn't send a pang of jealousy through me. "That's great, Emma. I'm glad you found someone," and I meant it. Or at least I wanted to mean it. As I sat at her dining table, watching Maya chatter excitedly about her school day, I realized something important. Emma and I had done the right thing by letting each other go. We had loved each other fiercely, but sometimes, love isn't enough to sustain a marriage. And that's okay. Later that night, as I drove home, the quiet hum of the car was interrupted by a thought that had been lingering in the back of my mind for months. Was there still room in my life for love? Or had I closed that chapter for good? The months after the divorce were a blur of work, parenting, and solitude. Harbor Edge, with its tranquil beaches and tight-knit community, became both my refuge and my prison. I spent most of my days at the office, immersing myself in Horizon Codes. Work will keep you grounded, I told myself, but deep down, I knew I was avoiding the emptiness that came with the end of my marriage. Maya, as always, was my saving grace. Her laughter could fill even the quietest corners of my heart. Every time I picked her up from Emma's, she'd run to me with open arms, her tiny voice shouting, "Daddy, guess what I did today?" Her stories about her friends, her favorite teachers, and her latest art projects were my anchor, reminding me of what truly mattered. Emma and I had settled into our co-parenting rhythm. We communicated often, always putting Maya first. "You're doing a great job," Liam, Emma said one day after I dropped Maya off. Her words were kind, but they felt hollow. Was I really doing a great job, or was I just surviving? It was during one of those drop-offs that Emma mentioned something that caught me off guard. "You should start dating again," she said, her tone light but sincere. I laughed, brushing off the suggestion. "Yeah, because finding someone who's okay with my work hours and my baggage will be a walk in the park." Emma raised an eyebrow. "You'd be surprised, Liam, you've got a lot to offer." I didn't believe her. How could I? My last attempt at love had ended in a painful but necessary goodbye. And yet, the idea lingered in the back of my mind, like a spark waiting to ignite. A few weeks later, that spark found its flame. It started innocently enough. one of Horizon Code's projects, a gaming app with an environmental twist, had caught the attention of a local journalist. Claire, a writer for a regional lifestyle magazine, reached out for an interview. "I'd love to hear more about the story behind the app," she said over the phone, her voice warm and professional. I agreed, mostly out of obligation, not realizing how much that conversation would change my life. Claire arrived at the office the next day, a notebook in hand and a curious glint in her hazel eyes. She was nothing like I expected: confident, witty, and refreshingly direct. "So, Liam," she began as we settled into the meeting room, "what made you want to combine gaming with environmental awareness?" Her question caught me off guard. Most interviews focused on revenue models or user engagement metrics, but Claire seemed genuinely interested in the story behind the numbers. "It's about giving back," I said, surprising even myself with the honesty of my answer. I wanted to create something that wasn't just profitable but also meaningful. The interview lasted an hour, but our conversation lingered in my mind long after she left. There was something about Claire, her curiosity, her easy laughter, that felt different. I told myself it was just professional admiration, but deep down, I knew it was more. A few days later, Claire emailed me a draft of her article. "Let me know if I've captured the essence of what you were trying to say," she wrote. Her words were thoughtful, her tone respectful. I replied with a few minor edits and a simple, "Looks great. Thanks for the write-up." Her response came within minutes: "You're welcome. Let me know if you're ever up for coffee. I'd love to pick your brain about other projects you're working on." I stared at the screen for longer than I'd like to admit. Was this just professional networking, or was there something more? My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally typed, "Sure. How about this Friday at 4? The coffee meeting felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Claire was easy to talk to, her questions thoughtful and her humor disarming. "So, are you always this serious?" she teased at one point, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I chuckled, shaking my head. "Only when I'm trying to impress a journalist." Her laughter was the kind that could light up a room. "Well, consider me impressed." Over the next few weeks, Claire and I fell into a rhythm. What started as casual coffee chats turned into long walks on the beach and late-night conversations that felt effortless. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a CEO, not as a father, but as Liam. Still, the ghosts of my past lingered. There were moments when I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to let someone in again. Claire noticed. "You don't have to rush," she said one evening as we watched the waves crash against the shore. "I'm not going anywhere." Her patience was both comforting and terrifying. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me couldn't shake the fear of history repeating itself. Could I really build something new, when the ruins of my last relationship still felt so fresh? Emma, ever perceptive, noticed the change in me. "You've been smiling more lately," she said during one of our co-parenting exchanges. Her tone was playful, but her eyes were warm. "Does this have anything to do with a certain journalist?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Maybe." Emma smiled, a genuine, supportive smile that reminded me of the friendship we had managed to salvage. "You deserve to be happy, Liam. Don't let the past hold you back." Her words stayed with me as I navigated this new chapter. Claire was different, open, understanding, and unafraid to call me out when I started retreating into my work. "You don't have to be perfect, you know," she told me one night as we sat on the porch of her apartment. Just be present." It wasn't easy, but I tried. With Claire's encouragement, I started setting boundaries at work, carving out time for the things that truly mattered. Maya, of course, was at the top of that list. She and Claire got along surprisingly well, their bond forming over shared jokes and impromptu art sessions at the dining table. One evening, as we all sat together painting seashells Maya had collected from the beach, I looked around the room and felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, new beginnings were possible. For a while everything seemed to fall into place. Work was manageable, Maya was thriving, and my connection with Claire felt natural and unforced. Life, for once, felt balanced, a precarious kind of harmony that I dared to hope would last. But hope, I've learned, is a fragile thing. It started with something small, a comment from Maya, as she helped me clean the kitchen one evening. "Claire didn't stay to watch me finish my painting today," she said, her tone curious but not accusatory. I paused, glancing at her. "Really? Did she say why?" Maya shrugged. "She said she had to go meet a friend. She seemed different." I brushed it off at first. Claire had her own life, her own commitments. It wasn't unusual for her to have plans outside of our time together. But something about Maya's tone stuck with me, a hint of confusion, a subtle question that lingered in the air. Over the next few weeks Claire's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She would cancel plans last minute, her explanations vague and hurried. I'm so sorry, Liam, she'd text. Work's been crazy, rain check. At first I believed her. Everyone gets busy, right? But the inconsistencies began to pile up. One evening, as we sat on the porch after Maya had gone to bed, I decided to address it. Is everything okay, Claire? You've seemed distracted lately. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course, everything's fine, just a lot going on at work. I nodded, forcing myself to accept her answer. But the doubt had taken root, a gnawing suspicion I couldn't shake. The breaking point came a month later. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, and Maya was at Emma's for the weekend. I had planned to spend the day with Claire, but she called that morning to cancel again. Her excuse was the same as always, work. But this time, something felt different. There was a tension in her voice, a hesitation that set off alarms in my mind. Unable to ignore my instincts, I decided to visit her apartment unannounced. Part of me hated the idea what kind of person shows up without warning, but the other part of me, the part that needed answers, pushed me forward. When I arrived, I knocked on her door, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment there was no response. Then, I heard voices muffled, but unmistakable. My stomach dropped. The door opened, and there she was, her expression a mixture of shock and guilt. Liam. What are you doing here? Before I could respond, a man stepped into view behind her. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded a confidence that only made my unease grow. Is this a bad time? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Claire stammered, her eyes darting between me and the man. This is Alex. He's a colleague. Alex extended a hand, his smile polite but distant. Nice to meet you, Liam. Claire's mentioned you. I shook his hand, my mind racing. Colleague or not, the tension in the room was palpable. I won't keep you, I said, forcing a smile. I just wanted to drop off something Maya made for you. I handed her the drawing Maya had insisted we frame, a picture of the three of us on the beach, Maya's handwriting scrawled across the bottom, family. Claire took it, her hands trembling. Thank you, she said softly. I'll call you later. I nodded and turned to leave, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that the life I had been building was beginning to crumble. The confirmation came 2 days later. Emma called me that evening, her voice hesitant. Liam, I need to talk to you about something. It's about Claire. My heart sank. What is it? She hesitated before continuing. I was at the cafe near Maya's school today, and I saw Claire. She was with a man. They were close. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Are you sure it was her? Emma sighed. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but yes, I'm sure. I thought you deserved to know. I thanked her, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The pieces were falling into place, each one more painful than the last. That night, as I sat alone in my living room, I replayed every moment, every conversation, every cancelled plan. The doubts that had been simmering for weeks boiled over into a painful certainty. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next day I confronted Claire. She came over after work, her demeanor casual, as if nothing was amiss. I wasted no time. Who is Alex, Claire? Her face paled. I told you, he's a colleague. I shook my head. Don't lie to me. I know there's more to it than that. She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. Liam, I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. Her confession was like a knife to the heart. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated before answering. A few months. The weight of her words crushed me. I had let her into my life, into Maya's life, and she had betrayed that trust. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Wasn't I enough? Claire looked down, unable to meet my eyes. It wasn't about you, Liam. I got scared. Things were getting serious, and I didn't know how to handle it. Her words offered no solace. The damage was done. I asked her to leave, my voice firm despite the tears streaming down my face. I need time, Claire. Time to figure out where we go from here, if we go anywhere at all. As the door closed behind her, I felt a sense of emptiness I hadn't experienced since my divorce. Trust, I realized, is a fragile thing. Once broken, it's almost impossible to piece back together. In the days that followed, I focused on Maya. She was my constant, my reason to keep moving forward. Emma, too, was a source of support, her friendship a lifeline in the storm. You'll get through this, Liam, she said one evening as we watched Maya play in the yard. You always do. Her words gave me strength, but the scars of Claire's betrayal would take time to heal. For now, all I could do was put one foot in front of the other and hope that the pain would one day fade into something more bearable. In the days following Claire's confession, I felt like I was living in a fog. Every corner of my life seemed tainted by her betrayal, and yet, life had to go on. Maya still needed me, work still demanded my attention, and Emma, ever the steady presence in my life, continued to check in on me, her concern both comforting and bittersweet. "Have you spoken to her since?" Emma asked one afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching Maya play with her friends in the yard. I shook my head. No, what's there to say? She made her choice. Emma nodded, her expression thoughtful. You deserve better, Liam. Don't let this define you. Her words stayed with me, a flicker of encouragement in the darkness. But moving on wasn't as simple as I wanted it to be. Claire had been a part of my life, a part of Maya's life. Letting go meant unraveling the threads she had woven into our world, and that wasn't easy. I avoided her calls and messages, needing time to sort through my thoughts, but Claire was persistent. One evening after I had put Maya to bed, my phone buzzed with yet another text. Liam, please, I need to talk to you, just once, please. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a cafe the next day. I told myself it was to find closure, to put an end to the chapter that had caused so much pain. But deep down, I wasn't sure what I hoped to gain from the conversation. When I arrived, Claire was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mix of hope and regret. Thank you for coming, she said softly as I sat down. I didn't respond immediately, my gaze fixed on the table. Finally, I looked up and met her eyes. What do you want, Claire? She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her cup. I wanted to apologize, for everything. I know I hurt you and I hate myself for it. Her words were sincere, but they did little to ease the ache in my chest. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. If you didn't want to be with me, why didn't you just say so? Claire's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't that simple, Liam. I cared about you, about Maya. But when things started getting serious, I got scared. I've never had something real before, and I didn't know how to handle it. I shook my head, frustration bubbling to the surface. So, you decided to sabotage it? To hurt the people who trusted you? She didn't answer, her silence speaking louder than any words could. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. I don't think I can forgive you, Claire. Not now, maybe not ever. Her tears spilled over, and she nodded, accepting my words without argument. I understand. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I stood up, my decision made. Goodbye, Claire. As I walked away, a sense of finality washed over me. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, but it was enough to take the first step forward. Back home, I found myself reflecting on the people who had been there for me through it all. Emma, Maya, even my team at Horizon Codes. They were my constants, the anchors that kept me grounded. And for them I decided it was time to let go of the anger and pain that had been weighing me down. The next morning, I called Emma. Do you have time to talk? I asked. Her voice was warm, as always. Of course, Liam. What's on your mind? We met at a park near her house, Maya running ahead to the playground as we settled onto a bench. I think I'm finally ready to move on, I said, surprising even myself with the truth of the statement. Emma smiled, her eyes filled with pride. That's good, Liam. You've been through a lot, but you're stronger than you think. Her words gave me the courage I needed to take the next steps. Over the following weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life not just for myself but for Maya. I made more time for her, joining her in her art projects and taking her on weekend adventures. She noticed the change almost immediately. You're happier, Daddy, she said one evening as we painted seashells at the dining table. I smiled, ruffling her hair. That's because I have you, sweetheart. Life wasn't perfect, far from it. But it was real, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was truly living. As the weeks turned into months, the pain of Claire's betrayal began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of resilience. I had faced heartbreak before, and I had survived. This time was no different. The weeks following my final conversation with Claire were some of the hardest I'd faced since the divorce. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the sense of failure, the feeling that I had allowed someone into my life, into Maya's life, only to have it all fall apart. There were nights when the silence of the house was unbearable, and I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea, staring out at the stars, wondering where I had gone wrong. Emma, true to her nature, was a steady presence during this time. She never pushed, never asked more of me than I was ready to give. Instead, she offered quiet support, her words of encouragement like small beacons in the darkness. Healing takes time. Liam, she said one evening after I had vented my frustrations to her over the phone. You'll get there, just be patient with yourself. Patience had never been my strong suit, but I took her words to heart. Slowly I began to piece my life back together. The first step was focusing on Maya. She had always been my anchor, and spending time with her was the best reminder of what truly mattered. We fell into a new routine: weeknight dinners filled with her stories about school, Saturday mornings spent making pancakes, and Sunday afternoons dedicated to whatever adventures she wanted to embark on. One Saturday, as we sat on the living room floor surrounded by her art supplies, Maya looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. "Daddy, are you still sad?" she asked, her voice soft but direct. Her question caught me off guard. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. Finally I nodded. "A little, sweetheart. But it's getting better." She studied me for a moment before nodding solemnly. "It's okay to be sad, you know. Mommy says it's like when you fall down, your knees hurt for a while, but they get better if you take care of them." I smiled, pulling her into a hug. "Your mommy's a smart lady." As the days turned into weeks, I began to see the truth in Maya's words. Healing was like tending to a wound. It took time, care, and a willingness to let the pain run its course. I threw myself into my work at Horizon Codes, not as a way to escape, but as a way to channel my energy into something productive. I set new goals for the company, expanding our outreach and focusing on projects that felt meaningful. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of purpose. Emma noticed the change almost immediately. "You're starting to look like yourself again," she said one afternoon as we sat on the porch, watching Maya play in the yard. I chuckled, shaking my head. I didn't realize I had stopped. She smiled, her eyes warm. "You deserve to be happy, Liam, and you're getting there. I can see it." Her words stayed with me, a quiet reminder that I was capable of moving forward, even when it felt impossible. But happiness, I realized, wasn't something that came all at once. It was a series of small moments: a shared laugh with Maya, a productive day at work, a quiet evening spent reading a book. Each moment was a step towards something brighter. One of those moments came unexpectedly. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had just finished a meeting with a potential client. As I walked through the bustling streets of Harbor Edge, I spotted a familiar figure sitting at an outdoor cafe. It was Claire. She looked up as I passed, our eyes meeting for a brief, fleeting moment. There was no animosity, no bitterness, just a quiet understanding that we had both moved on in our own ways. I gave her a small nod, and she returned it before turning back to her coffee. It was a simple exchange, but it felt like the closing of a chapter one had been holding on to for far too long. That evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The stars above seemed brighter, the air warmer, and for the first time I allowed myself to believe that I was exactly where I needed to be. Over the next few months, life continued to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. Emma and I grew closer, not as a couple, but as friends. We shared stories, offered advice, and leaned on each other in ways that felt natural and unforced. Maya thrived under our co-parenting dynamic, her laughter filling our homes and reminding us of the love we had once shared. And then there was Claire, not the Claire from my past, but another Claire. Her name wasn't actually Claire, it was Zoe, a new colleague I had met during a project collaboration. She was sharp, driven, and unafraid to speak her mind. At first our interactions were strictly professional, but as we worked together, I found myself drawn to her humor, her kindness, and the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. One evening, after a particularly successful project presentation, Zoe and I found ourselves sharing a drink at a local bar. "You're not as serious as I thought you'd be," she said with a teasing smile. I laughed, shaking my head. "I get that a lot. People think CEOs are all business, but I'm just a guy trying to figure things out like everyone else." Her smile softened. "Well, for what it's worth, you're doing a pretty good job." Her words stayed with me, a small but significant reminder that I was capable of building something new. Over the weeks that followed, our conversations grew longer, our laughter more frequent, and our connection undeniable. Zoe wasn't a replacement for what I had lost, she was something entirely different, a reminder that new beginnings could be just as beautiful as the past. By the time Maya's next birthday rolled around, life had taken on a rhythm that felt both steady and fulfilling. Emma, Zoe and I stood together at her party, watching as she blew out the candles on her cake, her face lit up with pure joy. In that moment, I realized that happiness wasn't about erasing the scars of the past, it was about embracing them as part of the journey. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Emma pulled me aside. "You've come a long way, Liam," she said, her voice filled with pride. I nodded, my heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." She smiled, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "We're still a team, you know, for Maya, for each other." Looking around at the life I had built, the people who had stood by me, and the future that lay ahead, I knew she was right. Life was messy, unpredictable, and often painful, but it was also beautiful in ways I had never imagined. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it all. Thank you for watching True Relationship Stories. Life's twists and turns teach us the true meaning of love, trust, and resilience. If this story inspired you, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt journeys. Your support helps us bring these powerful tales to life. Have a story of your own? Share it in the comments, we'd love to hear it. Stay tuned for more stories that celebrate the beauty of real connections.